Okay, I'm back. This is Jonathan Brown, professor at Georgetown University of Islamic Civilization, and that was the first time I did Facebook Live. I'm really not a fan of this stuff, by the way, in case you're wondering. But it's important to be able to reach, as Bain said, you, the people. Someone else said that recently, too. Anyway, there's two things that might happen while I'm talking to you. One, someone might try and install a stove in my house because my oven blew up the other day. It was horrible. I was cooking, reheating something. Anyway, it exploded, so I have to get a new one. Hopefully they won't come. They give you this window. Second thing that might happen is my kids might come home. In theory, we're insulated by a couple of doors from that, but I can't guarantee that you're not going to hear some toddlers screaming. I just hope they don't know any obscenities yet. All right, so Professor Jonathan Brown from Georgetown University. I also am a scholar at the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, which is extremely important because it takes high quality research on issues of importance for Muslims and people who are curious about Islam or who hear about Islam in the media, and it makes it available to a wider audience via all the wonderful social media that people have in their lives today. And I remember when Sheikh Omar Suleiman first told me about this, he said, you write great stuff, but only about 5 people read it. And I said, I know, it's horrible. So he said, yeah, well, we can help you out. So I was very happy to cooperate with them, and I think that this is a great method for communicating to a wider audience. And part of that is, of course, this weird thing of talking to Facebook Live. And so basically, the article that I wrote, a couple articles for Yaqeen so far. One was on honor killings. That's very interesting. You should read that. And the second one is on Hudud punishments. And of course, this is the stuff that everybody hears about on the news and TV and stuff like that, about hands cutting and people getting stoned and things like that. So I don't barely need to tell you why this is important, because if you're a Muslim, then you hear about it all the time, and if you're not Muslim and you watch the news or any movie or anything like that, you're going to hear about it as well. So this is an important topic that comes up in the news a lot. And basically, so I wrote this article about a couple weeks ago, and it's apparently been the most popular thing on the Yaqeen page. Sorry, I'm trying to look at my computer too because people are saying things, which is really stressful, by the way. I feel like I'm like some kind of fighter pilot or something, except minus a plane or anything dangerous or anything potentially interesting to normal human beings. Okay, so anyway, the most popular or most widely read thing on their site, and it's not surprising because it's a really big issue of contention for people that people have a lot of questions about. So some people wrote in questions, and apparently people can ask me questions too, although I don't really know how that works, to be completely honest. I think people write comments or something. Somebody asked me a question so I can see where the questions pop up. Okay. Well, until I figure out how that works, I'm going to answer questions that people already wrote in. Okay. Well, one person wrote an interesting question, which was, what about the presumption of innocence? This is something I mentioned in my article, which is kind of a side note, but it's very interesting. So we have this, if you ask anybody about the news or about the law, if you watch Law and Order, you'll always hear the phrase innocence till proven guilty. And there's this idea that this is some kind of long-standing tradition in the Anglo-Saxon legal mind, that sort of Anglo-Saxon people just know that there's this presumption of innocence. It's actually not true, interestingly. So if you go back to old English law, like before the Norman invasion of England, 1066, and then even after the Norman invasion of England until the 1300s, 1200s, 1300s, it was the opposite that was true. If someone accused you of something, the assumption was the burden was on you to prove that you were innocent. And that's when you have this, to be honest, quite silly things like trial by ordeal, where you'd have to prove you're innocent by grabbing a hot rock, and if your hand blistered and was infected, you were either guilty or innocent. I can't remember one. And then, of course, the Normans had trial by combat, which they ruled England after 1066. So it wasn't until Roman law was sort of rediscovered in the 1100s in Europe, in Western Europe, and then that was developed by the Catholic Church in what's called ecclesiastical law in the 1100s and 1200s. That's when they adopted this concept of, and developed this concept of innocence until proven guilty, that the presumption is innocence. And actually, my theory is that this actually came from Islamic law. I can't prove that yet, but, you know, it's very interesting that everyone will always talk about the role of Islam in influencing European science and philosophy and medicine, but no one ever talks about law. It's very interesting. I think it's because law is too close to people's identity. If you think about how much law is part of how we think about ourselves in the U.S. or in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, it's really close to our notion of wisdom, of some kind of national heritage of wisdom and common sense and things like that. So I think if you were to say that had some foreign influence on it, it would be damaging for cultural ego, so to speak. So, but I think it's sort of ridiculous to say that there's one area somehow of Western civilization that's not influenced by Islam, especially when it has so much access to Islamic legal material. So I think this, in fact, came into what's called civil law, or the tradition of Roman law in medieval Europe. And then the first time it was really expressed like that, innocent until proven guilty, was in about 1790 in the Declaration of the Rights of Man in the French Revolution. And so it's actually not originally British, it's French. Sorry, Nigel. That's like a typical British name. Okay. Someone's saying it'd be better for me to do this in the weekend. Okay. I'll make sure to clear my schedule for you. Come on, I do my best, people. Okay. So, second question was about, someone had said, I translated zina as adultery, and zina is not adultery, because it also is fornication, and I know that but you've hit on something which is very interesting, which is that there is no way to translate zina in English in one word. In American law and in English law, adultery is a married man sleeping with someone else who's not his wife. Basically, whether or not that person is married or not married doesn't matter. Adultery is a married man sleeping with it's a married person sleeping with somebody, whether or not the other person is married or not. So adultery is something that's done by a married person. It doesn't matter what the other party is. Fornication is something done by unmarried people, to unmarried people. So what's interesting is what's missing in this equation. So adultery is done by a married person with someone else, doesn't matter what they are. Fornication is between two unmarried people. Well, what about the person who's unmarried who has sex with someone who's married? They sort of falls out of these categories. But you're correct to say that these are different. So when you say adultery, you're talking about someone who's married who's doing something, being unfaithful. Whereas in the Islamic tradition, zina means all of this. So zina means any sex outside of a sanctioned relationship. That's what zina is. It doesn't matter who you are. Okay. But what's interesting, this is an interesting observation, because in American law and in British legal tradition, it's the status of the man, let's say in this case, the man who's married, that determines the nature of the crime. You see, whereas in the Near Eastern tradition prior to Islam, it didn't matter what the status of the man was. It mattered what the status of the woman was. So if you were a man and you had sex with a slave woman who belonged to someone else, then you just kind of damage their property. If you were a man and you slept with a married wife of another person, that was the death penalty in most of the Near Eastern legal traditions before Islam. What's interesting about Islam is it actually kind of doesn't consider gender in this issue, right? So there's no gender distinction. If you're an unmarried man or woman and you have sex, you've done zina. If you're a married man or woman and you have sex with someone you're not married to, then you have done zina. So there's not any any gender distinction anymore. Okay. Let's see here. But yes, you're correct that zina is not translated as adultery. It should be translated as adultery / fornication. But, who's going to read an essay that keeps saying adultery / fornication? So I tried to use the word zina when I could, and to use the word adultery when it was getting too cumbersome to have that the Arabic term repeated over and over again. Okay, we talked about that. Oh, somebody said that you said that the Hanafis did not consider apostasy or ridda to be a head crime, and that's not true. Yeah, it is true actually. In the response, the person said they linked me to a paper and they said you should read this, and I read that. But that paper was a good paper, but it was basically saying that the Hanafis considered apostasy to be a death penalty offense. I'm not debating that, although actually the main opinion in the Hanafi school is that apostasy is not a death penalty offense. That was stated by Tahawi and Imam al-Maraqinani and Ibn Humam. And it only really becomes the main opinion of the Hanafi school that apostasy... Sorry, I'm thinking of blasphemy. I'm sorry. I just got mixed up. Yes, very clearly, I apologize, it's very clear in the Hanafi school of law that apostasy of a man is death penalty offense. The issue of apostasy is another topic which we really need to have a whole discussion about. We can't possibly have a discussion about this today. Except that I will say that in my opinion, it's not just my opinion, that the Islamic death penalty for apostasy is not the penalty for someone who makes sort of the choice to change their religion based on freedom of conscience in their private capacity. Rather, it's punishment for someone who really publicly leaves Islam as a religion and in doing so makes like a political act of turning against the Muslim community and potentially urging other people to do so as well. But that's another topic we should have a whole another article on, and then another Facebook Live on. Yeah, okay. So, yes, no, the Hanafis don't consider apostasy to be a head offense. They do consider it to be a death penalty offense, and this is an important thing to remember. Just because something has a harsh punishment for it doesn't mean it's a hudud crime. The hudud crimes are ones that either the Quran or the Sunnah specifies very clearly a punishment for. And, oh my God, it's about to turn into chaos because a toddler's going to come in here. Hang on. So, I don't know if a rubber band around 2 doorknobs can hold the toddler out, but might get ugly. Okay, let's see here. Wish I had some stronger thread. All right. So basically, yeah, the Hanafis don't consider apostasy to be a had offense. They do consider it to be a death penalty offense. But the had is just because it's a death penalty offense. For example, murdering somebody. If you intentionally murder someone and their family wants you to be executed, then you'll be executed. That's a death penalty offense. But that doesn't make it a had crime. It just means that it's under a different category. It doesn't mean that I'm not denying that apostasy in the Hanafi school is a death penalty offense. I'm just saying it's not under the crime of hudud. Here it comes. Okay, مازن ممكن أنا بحكي مع الناس الآن ممكن تخلي بابا هنا بس لحاله من فضلكم يا جماعة الخير ممكن تخلوا برا عشان بابا مشغول. أنت كمان عشان بابا مشغول. Okay.
And this is fin.
Yeah, I know. Can you...
You
لا ليش أنا بخرج من هنا؟ هذا مكتب بابا مشغول. ممكن تمشي هناك بس تحكي مع باري شوية وبابا لغاية ما أنا أتخلص من هذا. أوكي. هذا الباب مفتوح مازن بس خليك تخرج برا من فضلك. Okay. Computer keeps. Why does it? It's all any time for my computer screen to turn off. It's this time. Okay. Yes. Finally, other question was blasphemy. Last question about blasphemy law in Pakistan. I actually don't know enough. I don't know a lot about the blasphemy law in Pakistan. I need to read more about it. I do know that it's a British era law. And if you read my article on honor killings, you'll find how all the countries in the Muslim world that have laws about honor killings, the laws all originally come from European laws, either from French law or from British law. It's actually not the idea that you get a mitigated punishment for killing somebody because it's a crime of honor. That's actually totally alien to the Islamic tradition, in my opinion, and I think that's pretty clear. It's actually not alien at all to the European and British legal traditions. Okay. Okay, but blasphemy is an issue. Just to go over, we should have whole other article on blasphemy. So there's no... Someone just tried to call me. Of course, this is what's going to happen. Someone's going to try and call my phone, and then someone's going to send me a text message, and then someone's going to send me a text message saying, why didn't you pick up the phone? And then blah, 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 blah. I'll do my best to concentrate. Hashim, يا ليت تخرج برا بس شوية عشان أنا أتخلص من هذا الكلام. أنا بحكي مع ناس من مش عارف إيه بلد يعني لقد أو قد يكونوا من بلاد كثيرة وبعيدة. Okay. So blasphemy. So there's no category of blasphemy in Islamic law. There's not like a crime of blasphemy. There's things that you can say that will cause you to, if you're a Muslim, will cause you to be to leave Islam and be a kafir and to engage in apostasy, which would then bring this into the issue of apostasy. I think the thing probably where we talk about blasphemy in the Islamic tradition most frequently is when we talk about insulting the Prophet Muhammad. So here, it's very interesting when you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet that his dealings are. Can you believe this child who's actually climbing on my desk behind this? Hashim, أنت لازم تمشي من هون من فضلك. No, أنت لازم. هذا باب مجهول لازم نمشي من هون. Okay? بس شوية عشان بعد بتخلص من هذا بعد كده أنا هيجي عندك وألعب معكم. Okay? بس روح نازل وبابا يجي بعد شوية. Okay? No, هاشم. أنا عارف أنت بدك تبقى هناك بس هنا بس أنا مشغول بس أنت مش لا ينبغي أن تصعد هناك هذا أمر خطير. حاشا الله أن توعى. Okay, so the Prophet when he's dealing with the issue of people insulting him, what you see is the main principle is there's not some rule of if you insult me, this is what happens. He actually deals with things very politically. So if there's someone within the community, even a Muslim or a Jew, let's say in Medina, who's insulting him, he doesn't have any punishment for them. And there's the famous hadith in Bukhari where, oh my Lord, where Hashim, you're on the keyboard now, and God knows what that's going to do to this. No, أنا مش ضده, أنت ضده. No, أنت ضده. خلاص.
No, خلاص.
No, yes, خلاص. Okay, so basically, he doesn't punish them. He says to Omar when Omar wants to kill the person. This is ridiculous. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. How the heck did you get out? Sorry. So Omar asks the Prophet, let me kill this person who's insulted you, and he says, I don't want people to say Muhammad killed his ashab, his companions. And what's interesting in the narration in Sahih Bukhari is that the narrator of the hadith says, at the time the immigrant Muslims, the Muhajirun, were small in number compared to the Ansar. So he's actually saying there's look at what the Prophet's taking into consideration. He's not going to punish someone if it's going to have politically negative consequences for the Muslim community. But when does he punish people who are insulting him? It's when there are people like Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf, who was a Muslim from Medina, who left to Mecca and actually was, someone said maybe have him sit in my lap. That would be the end of Facebook Live. They would actually stop Facebook Live as a technology. They would shut it down, and they would, because it would be so disruptive. So basically, Ka'b al-Ashraf goes to Mecca, and then he actually is doing tahreed. So he's going, and I see questions. They're flapping up on they're going up on my screen, I think. Okay, so Ka'b al-Ashraf actually goes to Mecca, and he goes and this is in the Kitab al-Marasil of Abu Dawood, and he hangs on the side of the Kaaba, and he goes and he says, he brings all the Quraysh nearby, and he's asked them, swear oath to me that you're going to go fight the Prophet. And he's reciting poetry against the Prophet and things like that. So this is the person that the Prophet has assassinated, because it's not because he's insulting the Prophet. It's because he's actually an active propagandizer and trying to raise an army against the Prophet and against the Muslims in Medina. So what you see in the fiqh, in the Islamic law, that is trying to figure out what is the punishment for insulting the Prophet. For non-Muslims, if you're a non-Muslim who insult the Prophet, the ruling is in the Maliki school that, okay, but another important point to keep in mind, which is, think about this. If you're a Muslim, if you're a non-Muslim living under Muslim rule, and you decide not to become Muslim, which is fine, what does that mean? Think about that. It means either you don't believe the Prophet's claim to be a prophet, or you think he's crazy. The point is, you're not accepting his claim, and in that non-acceptance is an inherent insult to him. Now, that was fine, because no one was ever punished because we know from the Quran and from the Prophet Sunnah that non-Muslims are allowed to keep their religion. So what that means is, even if that involves an insult to the Prophet, that's not a problem. But if a non-Muslim exceeds that, so if they go out in public and they start saying the Prophet was this, that, and the other, and they start insulting him and saying this, that, and the other, and they're going out in the street, then that would become something that exceeds their kufr, their unbelief. And according to the Maliki school of law, then that person, that non-Muslim, would be killed. In the Hanafi school, the main ruling is that historically the most prominent ruling in the Hanafi school is that it's up to the ruler to decide based on the political considerations, how the non-Muslims should be punished. But that's not the opinion that becomes let's say, the official opinion in the Ottoman Empire, which was followed the Hanafi school. They took another opinion, of a minority opinion in the school, which said that non-Muslim who insults the Prophet is executed. And I think that's also probably what's behind the Pakistan law. That's just my guess. And then the Shafi school is very simple. It's just up to the ruler to decide. And I think that's if I were, the head of some Muslim polity or something, I would just say this is up to the ruler to decide based on political considerations, because that's the principle of the Prophet's Sunnah, is that there's no rule on this. It's based on what kind of dangers does it present, what kind of issues does it present. Okay, did I answer all the questions? I think so. Does anyone else answer questions? Who else has asked questions? Let me see if I can find questions on this thing that I'm looking at. Can't see them on my computer. Let's see if I can find them on this thing that I'm looking at here. Ooh. Someone joined. Do I have any references for these things? Yes, I have references for these things. It's called in my my article on Hudud, which I'm talking about, which you can find on the Clean website. And the blasphemy stuff, you know what? Someone needs to write an article on blasphemy. By gum. So, you know, email the Yaqeen people and tell them somebody should write an article on Yaqeen. You know who's going to end up writing? I'm going to end up writing it probably. Which is fine, because, you know what? I live to serve. Let's see here. Let me see if other people are asking questions. Why were the... Okay, Suhail says, why were the mushrikeen executed? The mushrikeen were not executed, as far as I know. The Quran says that basically, if you look at the combination of the Quran and Sunnah, the one group that the Muslims, during the time of the Prophet, that the Muslims were supposed to, were allowed to basically fight until they became Muslims, so either convert or die, was the polytheists of Central Arabia, the mushrikun of Arabia. By the way, we know that's not mushrikun in general, so if Muslims, because when Muslims encountered polytheists outside of Arabia, they didn't treat them as polytheists. They treated them as people of the book, like when the Muslims entered India in the year 711. Why were they executed? Why? Okay, so this is an interesting question, which Muslim scholars have debated. So why is it this group is the one group that sort of is told to convert or die of all the groups in the human community? And you know, it's not, I don't think there's a clear answer because you're not given a clear answer in any of the scriptural sources, either the Quran or the Sunnah. But I mean, this is a position taken by Imam al-Maturidi and others, is that they were the ones who were the most open and susceptible to the Quran's message. So this was their language, this was their culture, this was their person, the Prophet. So the fact that if they didn't understand him and they didn't accept what he was saying, that there was something kind of just egregiously stubborn about that. That's the argument of Imam al-Maturidi and others. Can I please speak a little louder? Well, if I go back in time. Okay. A little unrelated. I don't know if I click on this. Block. No, I don't want to block this person. Hang on a second. Let's see if I can find comments here. Messages. Sorry, people. Yeah, I just don't know how to do these things well enough. Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Let's see. People, if you have questions and you asked them before, ask them again, and I'll try and answer them. In the fact, blasphemy laws were enacted. This is just, sorry, one second. It's hard because what is this? Sorry, one second, people. I'm just trying to figure something out, where to go on this page to find out where the Facebook Live thing is. Scroll the page, let's see the comments. Okay. Okay, oh, there I am. Ooh, I'm watching two of myself. Okay, here we go. Here are the questions. Can you please write an article about blasphemy? Yes, I'll write an article about blasphemy. That sounds fun. Due to the presence of the Prophet Muhammad and his safety, does that render them obsolete after his death? You know, this is an interesting question, right? So how much of the, a big question is how much of the laws that, especially political and military decisions that the Prophet makes, how many of them, should be continued after his death? This is something that Muslim scholars have always tried to tackle and debate, have different answers for. I'd say that in general, when Muslim scholars come to that conclusion, they default to the idea of saying it's the decision of the ruler. And as long as the ruler is not violating people's rights under the Shariah, or what's called their hukuk al-ibad, the rights of, actually this is human rights. I mean, it's kind of cheesy, I don't want to sound cheesy, but Muslims developed human rights like, centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries before they were really articulated in the Western tradition. With this notion of hukuk al-ibad, namely the rights that every, or hukuk adamiyya, the rights that every human being has, right to property, dignity, religion, reason, and progeny. So as long as the ruler wasn't violating people's rights, then it was sort of up to the ruler to make these political calculations. And that was a way of sort of not locking the Muslim community into what might have been decisions that were made for specific calculations at the time. Okay, can you please, yes, look down. What are examples of women's rights in Islam that were only given to Western women 100 years ago? The right for married women to own property, for example. This was only in 1882 in England that they got this. Be fully legally competent, like to have full right to engage in contracts and stuff. This was in France. It was only after World War II they got this in women. In Sahih Muslim, there are two hadiths regarding a verse of stoning. Yeah, so the stoning verse is people have a lot of questions about that. So let's see here. See all. Why not? Hang on. So I'll talk about the stoning verse. If you go to the article on yaqeen, you'll see that I have a discussion of that. And sorry, one second. Okay, so basically there's so much great article. These are great questions. I can't keep up with them all. You guys are bombarding me with great questions. So stoning. So basically the standard position of Muslim scholars, and this is actually across sects. So even the Mu'tazilites, who everyone thinks are sort of so totally rational, and they're always like the good guys nowadays, Mu'tazilites, they all held that the punishment for adultery, i.e. a married person engaging in illicit sex, is death by stoning. And then the question was, wait a second, but the Quran, the early Kharijites did not accept that, by the way. The Kharijites, who everyone likes to say are unreasonable and horrible, they did not accept the stoning. Everyone else did. So the question is, well, how is this the case? Because the Quran says that the man or the woman who engages in zina, lash them 100 times. So give them 100 lashes. So that seems to be the punishment. Where's this other punishment from? So in the one opinion is that it comes from the Sunnah of the Prophet, that the Prophet added this as a punishment. Now the male person's coming. Of course, it's going to be one of those things where I have to sign for it if I'm lucky. No signing. Okay. So the Prophet added punishments. For example, for the unmarried person, they get lashed 100 times, and then they get exiled for a year. This is a well-known hadith. The Hanafis don't accept that. The Hanafi school does not accept that because they don't consider that hadith to be strong enough to add on to and modify a Quranic ruling, the Quranic ruling about 100 lashes. But all the other three Sunni schools say that the punishment for an unmarried person who does zina is that they have 100 lashes and then they get exiled for a year. Now, the idea is that the kind of as a in symmetry with that, the Prophet added stoning to the married person's punishment. So they get 100 lashes and stoning. Another theory, and this became kind of the most accepted theory, is that there was originally a verse of the Quran which said, "Ash-shaykh wa ash-shaykhatu idha zaniya farjuhuma al-batta." the noble man and the noble woman who commit zina, stone them, for sure, stone them surely. And the idea is that this was originally part of the Quran, and then God orders the prophet to remove this from the Quran, but the ruling remains. So this is the one instance of what's called naskh tilawat dun al-hukm, which is that the reading of the Quran, the verse itself is removed, and the ruling remains, which is, to be honest, kind of insane. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. I have to say, it's my personal opinion. I don't understand why you'd have that. The answer of Muslim scholars classically was that there was too much confusion over the different punishments for zina, that if you were married, unmarried, etc., and so the idea is you just remove this verse. But that wouldn't work, because there's still punishment over. In fact, there's even more punishment, because now people are talking about a verse of the Quran that's not even there anymore, and they're getting confused about that. So I think that it's. I personally don't find it convincing. Now, but there was not any real debate about this. Muslim scholars didn't have a problem with this. They said there was a verse of the Quran that was there, and then God told the prophet to remove the verse, and so it's not there anymore, but the ruling remains. And the ruling has also been confirmed by consensus, and so that's not a problem. That was the attitude of classical Muslim scholars, and that's the attitude of the majority of Muslim scholars today. But in the 20th century, there have been some scholars, like I think the best argument is by Sheikh Abdullah bin Siddiq al-Ghumari, who died in 1993, a very, very knowledgeable, immensely knowledgeable, ocean of knowledge Moroccan scholar, died in 1993, as I said, Abdullah bin Siddiq al-Ghumari, who said, he wrote a book called, what was it called? ذوق الحلاوة في, I think, في إبطال نسخ تلاوة, I think was what the book was called. And he argues that he says the punishment for a married person committing zina is stoning, but that's just sunnah of the prophet and consensus of Muslims. So there's no Quranic ruling, there's no Quranic root for it, and nor is there any need for there to be a Quranic basis for it. But that, again, he basically says, and all the hadiths that mention this as being a Quranic verse are not widely transmitted enough. They are considered to be sahih hadiths, but they are not widely transmitted enough for us to accept what is in effect a highly irrational claim that the Quranic text was altered, and also a claim that kind of contradicts the Quran's message about itself, which is that it's a text that's intact and that is guarded by God. So in 1973, Sheikh Muhammad Abu Zahra, who's a famous Egyptian jurist and professor of law and traditionally trained scholar, he died in 1974, a year before his death, in a conference, and I think it was in Algeria. He said that he also doesn't believe that in the punishment for stoning, because he thinks that this is inappropriate for the crime. And the general theory is, well, where did it come from then? The people who denied this punishment now, they say that it came over from Jewish custom. That it was basically Muslims, sort of early Muslims trying to emulate Jewish custom. I'm not trying to say one way or the other. This is a very controversial issue. I'm just telling you what the opinions are. Okay. When you say exiled for a year, where do these people get exiled to? Outside the boundary of the qasr. So if you'd have to be somewhere beyond, in the Hanbali school, like 82, and Shafi school, 82 kilometers. So outside the distance after which you'd be able to shorten your prayers and combine your prayers. Do I think that hudud punishment should ever again be implemented? That's an interesting question. I mentioned a verse that was put in and then removed. I talked about that. So many questions. Do I think the hudud punishment should ever again be implemented? That's a tough question. Well, it's a loaded question too, right? Because you're asking, in one sense, you're saying, should the hudud punishments exist in the law? or then should that law be carried out? I think that as a Muslim, one would have to say that in theory the hudud should be part of the law. I think that if you're a Muslim, you'd have to say that. Otherwise, I think you would risk not being Muslim. Not to put it in just my opinion. I'm not a mufti, just a professor, right? Because it's so clearly stated in the scripture. It's so clearly stated in the Quran, the Sunnah. I mean, to sort of just deny that this is even theoretically desirable or theoretically right, I think that is very problematic. Okay, well, what about them actually being implemented? As I discussed at length in my article, they weren't supposed to be implemented from the beginning. I mean, the idea is you're not supposed to carry out these laws, and this is clear in the Quran, where you have 100 lashes for zina as a punishment, but then right 2 verses later you have the requirement to have 4 witnesses to the act. And if you don't have 4 witnesses, then the people who do accuse the person of zina are lashed 80 times for slander. And the Prophet makes it clear that the witnesses actually have to see the man's penis going into the woman's vagina like a eyeliner applier going into the bottle of eyeliner. This is in the hadith, in Sunan Abu Dawud. So if you want more on this, you've got to read my article, because I have tons of stuff on this. Tons of stuff. Okay. So I think that this is not intended to be a law that's implemented. I think this is intended to be a law that states the community's values about certain issues. It's a statement about what Muslims think are right and wrong. It's not actually about punishing people. In theory, no one should be punished for these things. I mean, the punishment shouldn't actually be carried out. Okay. Hang on a second. So where are these unpinned comment? I don't even know what that means. The psychological reality of man has changed within the last century. Our sensitivities to gruesome, bloody acts have been extremely heightened. Many Muslims feel guilty between support for God's laws and their modern sensitivities. Make them feel, oh no, here comes the kitchen. Here comes the stovetop, everybody. If I don't get the stovetop installed, I'm not going to be able to cook. And then you know what's going to happen? I'm going to get fired as a husband and a dad. I'm going to get taken, I won't be giving haqq to the people that I owe haqq to. So that's a really good question. Person that I just read the question of, it's actually mentioned in the last part of the article. Please go to the last part of the article and read it. Folks, I've been looking at a picture of myself for I don't know how many minutes now. I hope I know people have been out there because they're asking questions. I hope it hasn't been horrible for you. Next time, I'm going to lock myself in a soundproof room, and here come more kids. And I'm going to make sure there's no stovetops being delivered, and other things that will make it a better experience. I got to go now. Assalamu alaikum. Please read the article, because I have to say it's really good. It has a lot of movie references in it, and some really good clips to YouTube stuff that's very funny. So enjoy. I got to go. Ma salama. Jazakum Allahu khair. Wa Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam wa a'la.